If you are hearing this, then you have stepped into the hour where stories stop behaving like stories. This is the moment where prophecy sharpens into consequence, where blood begins to speak, where the fragile line between the mortal world and the ancient, watching Earth finally splits open. Hawksmere stands on the knife's edge of annihilation, and every breath carries the metallic taste of a coming judgment. There is no room for hesitation here, no soft place for hope to hide. A single choice, one trembling spark of daring, has dragged an entire kingdom into the jaws of something vast, something timeless, something powerful enough to unmake every law that men believe they have mastered. Tonight, you will not witness a tale of strategy or steel. You will witness the cost of awakening a sleeping god. You will follow Alianor Ravenshade into the mouth of the abyss, where her courage is stripped to its bones and her faith in reason collapses under the weight of a power older than language. In this final chapter, The Crown of Brambles, truth reveals itself not through victory, but through ruin. It is here that tyrants learn humility, that the land itself rises to pass judgment, and that a woman who has fled every throne laid at her feet must finally decide whether she will refuse destiny forever or accept a crown forged from terror and sacrifice. This is the end of the Gilded Cage, the end of innocence, the end of the world as Hawksmere knew it. Whether it becomes a beginning depends entirely on who survives the fire.
Chapter 30, A Crown of Brambles. The hour of decision was not an hour. It was a single excruciating moment stretched on the rack of time, a drawn-out heartbeat where the fate of every soul in Hawksmere balanced on the edge of an axe. The air within the keep was a physical weight, thick with the smell of cold fear, desperate hope, and the coppery tang of impending bloodshed. Alianor's gambit was not a risk. It was a heresy, a prayer sent not to a benevolent heaven, but to the dark, murmuring, and utterly pitiless heart of the earth itself. The descent, inviting the Leviathan. The return to the miner's tunnel was a descent into the gullet of a waking Leviathan. The familiar path was now a throat, the damp walls its pulsating flesh. The air grew colder with every step, the scent of wet stone and lingering poison giving way to a new, terrifying aroma. The metallic tang of a lightning strike fused with the deep, primordial smell of loam from a freshly opened grave. Alianor went with them. She would not wait, a passive queen. If they were to become gods or monsters, she would stare into the abyss and speak its name. Aemon led, his body a testament to agony and will, each step a fresh victory over his screaming wounds. Alianor followed, a single lantern in her hand, its flame a guttering, pathetic mockery of the power they sought. Behind them, Len and Rodri moved like men in a dream, their faces set in masks of grim resolve, carrying not swords, but the tools of sacrilege, a heavy sledgehammer, an iron crowbar, and a small hide-wrapped bundle that felt heavier than any weapon, the carved wolf and the carved sparrow. The silence was alive. It was a low, sub-audible hum that vibrated up through the soles of their boots, setting their teeth on edge and resonating in the marrow of their bones. The dripping water fell in a syncopated, ritualistic rhythm, a druid's drum counting down to a sacrifice they were both offering and becoming. When they reached the cavern, the change was a physical blow. The air was electrically charged, making the fine hairs on their arms stand erect. The cleansed pool was a dead, black eye, but the fissure they had created, the wound in the world, was the source of the living nightmare. It pulsed with a faint, sickly green light that beat in a slow, rhythmic cadence. Lub-dub, lub-dub. It was no longer a light, it was a heartbeat. A deep, resonant thrum accompanied each pulse, a sound that was felt in the soul, not heard by the ears. The dark stain on the floor where Jocelyn's men had fallen seemed to steam in the eerie glow, a sacrifice the earth had already accepted. "It's stronger," Aemon whispered, the words torn from him, his voice hushed with a reverence born of pure terror. It's not just listening, it's waiting. Alianor's own heart hammered a frantic counter rhythm against her ribs. She stepped forward into the epicenter of the storm, her lantern held high. The green light seemed to recoil from its mundane flame, the ancient disdainful of the modern. "What in God's name do we do?" Rodri begged, his voice cracking under the strain. "We remind it of its enemy," Alianor said, her voice unnervingly steady, a marvel of controlled terror. She knelt, placing the lantern on the stone floor. Its light seemed a tiny, doomed island in a sea of emerald malevolence. From the hide bundle, she took the carved wolf. The runes felt alive under her touch, warm and vibrating, as if in tune with the cavern's dreadful pulse. She laid it on the stone directly before the fissure, the wolf's snout pointing east, towards Jocelyn's camp, a compass needle of vengeance. "You were wronged," she spoke, her voice clear and carrying, a testimony in the cathedral of the deep. She did not plead, she bore witness. "Your silence was shattered by poison and greed. The man who began this is gone, but his kin is here. He brings the same blight, the same arrogance. He seeks to be your master." She placed the carved sparrow beside the wolf, a tiny, fragile symbol of hope beside the icon of wild justice. "We are the ones who cleansed your water. We are the ones who fight the poison. We are not your masters. We ask for your aid, as allies against a common foe." She looked at Aemon and Len, her eyes reflecting the hellish green glow. "Now, make it angry." Aemon hefted the iron crowbar. He took a deep breath, a man preparing to strike a king. With a guttural cry that was part effort, part raw, unleashed fury, he drove the metal point into the pulsating lip of the fissure. The reaction was instantaneous and apocalyptic. The green light did not flare, it detonated. It turned the cavern into a single, searing emerald sun, blinding them, burning the afterimage of the fissure onto their retinas. The deep thrum intensified into a deafening, concussive roar that was pure elemental force. It slammed into them, driving the air from their lungs and throwing them to their knees. The entire cavern shuddered violently, a giant rousing from slumber. Dust and stones hailed from the ceiling, and a long, jagged crack split the wall with a sound like the world breaking its spine. Len, screaming a wordless battle cry that was torn away by the roar, stumbled forward with the sledgehammer. "For Gareth! For Doi! For every soul they've crushed!" He swung the massive hammer in a wild, desperate arc, bringing it down on the rock face with the force of a meteor strike. Crack boom. A spiderweb of fractures exploded outwards from the point of impact. The green light didn't just pour out, it vomited from the new cracks, a torrent of incandescent rage. It was a continuous, raging river of malevolent energy, flooding the cavern, stealing the air, burning their eyes with its corrosive glory. The temperature plummeted, then skyrocketed. The very fabric of reality seemed to be tearing at the seams. "The vents!" Aemon screamed over the cataclysmic roar, scrambling back from the fissure, which was now grinding open like the maw of a starved beast. "It's going for the vents!" The ground beneath Jocelyn's camp was about to become hell, and they were trapped in the antechamber. "Out, now!" Alianor screamed, snatching up the lantern. They fled, a frantic, stumbling, falling scramble back up the tunnel as the world disintegrated behind them. The roar pursued them, a living entity, a tsunami of elemental fury they had just unleashed. They had not called a hound to the hunt. They had stabbed a dragon in its heart, and it was now awake, and its wrath would be biblical. The altar of ambition, a kingdom of dust. In Jocelyn's camp, the mood was one of grim, polished triumph. The refusal was a formality, a final piece of theater before the main event. The execution was the necessary, brutal prologue to the final chapter of his conquest. It was realpolitik. It was the natural order asserting itself. The platform was a stark, ugly blasphemy against the snow. Tom and Bess knelt, their futures measured in minutes. Bess's whole body trembled, her knuckles white around the hidden sparrow, her lips moving in a silent, frantic litany. Tom's face was a mask of stoic acceptance, his eyes fixed on Hawksmere's walls, drawing a final, grim strength from the sight. Sir Jocelyn addressed his men, his voice a model of reasoned authority. "Let this be the last lesson this land requires. This is the fate of those who defy the natural order. Their blood sanctifies the new peace we bring." He nodded to the executioner. The hooded giant stepped forward, the axe a promise of finality. On the battlements, a collective horrified gasp was followed by the ragged sound of Father Clement, leading a desperate prayer. The guards gripped their weapons, their knuckles white, their hope a dying ember. Jocelyn raised his hand, a king pronouncing sentence. The executioner tightened his grip on the axe, muscles coiling like springs. And then the world ended. It began as a tremor, a gentle vibration that made the snow on the tents dance. Then it grew. The posts on the platform swayed. The executioner stumbled, his axe dipping towards the ground. A murmur of confusion, tinged with the first inkling of fear, rippled through the ranks. Jocelyn's brow furrowed in annoyance. "Steady, you dogs." But the earth did not steady. It convulsed. A deep, grinding roar erupted not from the sky, but from the very bowels of the earth beneath the eastern meadow. The ground itself seemed to buckle and roll like a rug being shaken. Soldiers were thrown from their feet. Tents collapsed, their guy lines snapping with the sound of breaking bones. Then came the light. From a dozen points across the meadow, plumes of that same sickly green energy erupted from the ground, shooting into the leaden sky like malevolent geysers. This was not the light of sun or fire. It was a corrosive illumination that leached color from the world, casting long, dancing, insane shadows that twisted and writhed. The very air seemed to curdle. And with the light came the sound, a cacophony of grinding stone and a high psychic wail that clawed directly at the mind, shredding reason and discipline. Horses, eyes rolling in panic, screamed and reared, breaking their tethers and stampeding through the camp, trampling men underfoot. Soldiers dropped their weapons, clutching their heads, their screams lost in the overwhelming roar. This was not a battle. It was a systemic collapse. The ground directly beneath Jocelyn's command tent split open with a sound like the death of a god. A fissure yawned, not spewing lava, but that same corrosive, hungry green energy. It swallowed the tent, his maps, his fine furniture, his chest of coin, his very seat of power, in a single, gluttonous gulp. The red boar banner, symbol of 1,000 years of Mowbray pride, tipped and was consumed by the glowing crack, erased from existence. It was not an attack. It was an annulment. The land was not fighting Jocelyn's army. It was rejecting its very presence, scrubbing it from the surface like a stain. The reckoning and the rescue. Through the green hell. Chaos was too small a word. This was pandemonium, wrought by an angry earth, a scene from a forgotten book of apocalyptic scripture. The disciplined army dissolved into a mob of terrified, shrieking animals, each man fighting a primal, losing battle against an enemy he could not comprehend. On the platform, Tom and Bess were forgotten. The executioner had fled into the maelstrom. Jocelyn stood frozen, his face a perfect mask of utter, stupefied horror. The world of law, lineage, and leveraged power he had mastered had been unmade in less than a minute. He was not a lord. He was a man, small and insignificant, facing the judgment of a furious planet. Seeing their chance, Tom shoved Bess, his voice a raw shout. "Run, now!" They scrambled from the platform, their hands still bound, and plunged into the green-tinged hell. They were insects scrambling across a floor that was cracking open beneath them. They dodged panicked horses, stumbled over fallen men, and veered away from the glowing fissures that continued to tear the earth asunder, each one humming with destructive power. From the battlements, Rodri saw them, two small figures fighting their way through the end of the world. There, by the smithy wreckage. Without a single order, driven by a bond stronger than fear, he and a handful of other guards wrenched open the sally port and charged out. They were not soldiers on a sortie. They were rescuers plunging into a collapsing universe. They fought their way through the disoriented fringe of the camp, not with swords, but with shoves, shouts, and sheer, desperate will, carving a path through the madness. A Mowbray soldier, driven insane by fear, lunged at Tom with a pike. Rodri intercepted him, taking the deep gash in his own shoulder with a grunt of pain, but shoving the man back into the path of a stampeding warhorse. He grabbed Tom and Bess, his blood slick on their arms, and they ran, stumbling, falling, scrambling back towards the open gate, the roaring green inferno at their backs, the very ground trembling as if to swallow them whole. The Crown of Brambles, a queen forged in fire and stone. Back in the cavern, the reaction was immediate and absolute. The moment the earth began its divine retribution in the meadow above, the entity in the fissure seemed to expend its cataclysmic energy in one final, definitive burst. The green light flared one last time, a silent, blinding scream of release, and then it vanished completely, snuffed out like a candle. The deafening roar ceased, cut off as if by a blade. The cavern was plunged into a silence so profound it was louder than the chaos had been, a silence of spent power, of cosmic exhaustion, broken only by their ragged, panting breaths and the steady, innocent drip of clean, pure water. It was over. The land had spoken its piece in the only language it knew, absolute, terrifying power. And then it had gone back to sleep. Exhausted, trembling, their ears ringing in the sudden quiet, they stumbled back to the surface. As they emerged from the tunnel, blinking in the gray, mundane daylight, they were met by a scene of impossible, tear-streaked salvation. The sally port was swinging shut behind Rodri, Tom, and Bess, who collapsed into the arms of their weeping, cheering friends, a tangle of relief and shared trauma. Alianor and Aemon staggered into the lower bailey. The crowd did not just part for them. They recoiled, then pressed forward, their faces a complex tapestry of awe, gratitude, and a deep, abiding terror. They had not just witnessed a miracle. They had witnessed their lady consort with forces that belonged in scripture and nightmare. They had been saved by a power that could have as easily turned and consumed them all. Tom, clutching his bleeding arm, looked at Alianor. His eyes held no simple gratitude, but a dazed, profound understanding. They had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. Bess broke from the crowd and ran to Alianor, throwing her arms around her, sobbing uncontrollably, the carved sparrow still clutched so tightly in her fist it seemed fused to her skin. Together, Alianor and Aemon climbed to the battlements one final time. The scene that met them was one of utter desolation. Jocelyn's camp was a ruin. Tents were shredded, wagons splintered, supplies scattered to the winds. The earth itself was scarred with smoking, blackened fissures that steamed in the cold air, the wounds of the earth's wrath. To the south, a broken, disorganized rabble of men fled, their discipline, their pride, and their will to fight left behind in the scarred meadow. There was no army left. There was only a warning, carved into the very soil. Sir Jocelyn de Mowbray was not among them. He was last seen standing alone in the center of the cataclysm, his sword hanging useless from his hand, staring into the abyss that had swallowed his command tent, his ambition, and his entire understanding of the world. A king without a kingdom, a lord without land, a broken man staring at the grave of his own hubris. The siege was over. They had won. But as Alianor looked out at the scarred land, a kingdom paid for in terror and eldritch fire, she felt no triumph, no joy, only a profound, weary, and terrifying responsibility that settled on her shoulders heavier than any crown. Aemon came to stand beside her, his shoulder a solid, warm pressure against hers. He didn't speak. No words could encompass what they had done, what they had unleashed, what they had become. She had saved them. She had defied tyrants and broken armies. She had proven that the spirit of Hawksmere was unbreakable. But the cost was a crown she had never wanted. A crown not of gold, but of brambles, woven from sacrifice and steeped in terror, its roots sunk deep into something ancient, wild, and only temporarily pacified. She was no longer just the Lady of Hawksmere. She was the keeper of the hearthfire, the steward of the stone, the hand of the thorn. And she had learned the most fundamental truth of power. The same fire that warmed could also consume. The battle for survival was over, but as she looked at Aemon, at the weary, hopeful, terrified faces of her people, and then back at the smoking, wounded earth, she knew the truth with a certainty that chilled her to the bone. The struggle to build a future from the ashes and to live with the terrifying, slumbering god they had awakened beneath their feet was just beginning, and the world outside was watching.
And now, as the echoes of the earth's fury fade and the smoke lifts from the ravaged fields, we stand at the edge of what remains. The siege has ended, but victory has never felt so heavy, so uncertain, so drenched in the knowledge of what was unleashed. Alianor de Clervaux has saved her people, but she did not do so through armies or treaties. She did it by stepping into a place where no noble woman should ever walk. She bargained with forces that regard humanity as a temporary arrangement, an interruption in the long heartbeat of the earth. She touched a power that remembers every trespass, every wound, every greed-driven theft carved into stone. And in return, it placed a mantle upon her shoulders, not a coronet passed down through bloodlines, but a crown of brambles, painful, honest, and irrevocable. A crown woven from choices that can never be undone. A crown that demands vigilance, sacrifice, and the courage to carry a secret capable of reshaping the world. This is the true end of Book 1. Not the soft close of a fairy tale, but the awakening of a larger war. The realm is scarred, the people are changed, and beneath the soil, the slumbering god they provoked has not forgotten the taste of its own rage. The gilded cage has cracked, its bars are falling away. What emerges next, from Hawksmere, from Alianor, from the shadows beyond her borders, will challenge every bond of loyalty and every boundary of power. If you wish to experience the full breadth of this world, the rise, the ruin, the romance laced with danger, you may now claim The Gilded Cage, Book 1 of the Scandalous Hours, in its complete form. The novel is officially available on Amazon for all who wish to continue the journey, and for those who desire a treasure touched by my own hand, a signed copy may be purchased directly from my website. Book 1 closes here, but the scandal, the sorcery, and the storm that gathers on the horizon are only just beginning. Until the next revelation finds you, I remain Lady Aurelia Ravenshade. This has been the Scandalous Hours, and our story is far from over.